Good evening, everybody. My name is Glenn Hurley. I'm the CEO of Compliance3, and we're effectively acting as hosts for the evening alongside everybody else. So welcome. Just by way of introduction, I think we all acknowledge we work in a rapidly changing world, and in the last 2 weeks I've noted two things to remember about how rapidly it's changing. First one was, and poor old TalkTalk are going to get referenced several times this evening, I suspect. But the first thing is that the international terrorists that hacked in to TalkTalk actually and allegedly turned out to be two 15-year-old schoolboys who did it from their bedroom and who managed to miraculously discover that one of the admin passwords at TalkTalk was 3 digits. So that says a lot about security. And the second thing I've discovered, and whoever watched the Panorama program this week, which was again quite a revelation, is that you can buy cyber security hacking software on the dark web. So you can log on and buy the software that you need to hack on the dark web. My only word of caution on that is, be very careful if they ask you for your credit card details when you go to pay for it. Without further ado, we put together a panel this evening who in a minute I shall ask to briefly introduce themselves. In the Q&A session, if you put your hand up, I think we may have a microphone. If not, small enough, shout out. Just introduce yourself however you want to and ask your question. If it's directed to a member of the panel, say so. Otherwise, we'll let whoever's on the panel pitch in.
Cyber security seems to be jolly expensive, what with 500 million being a drop in the ocean and everything. I mean, what's small business expected to do? Is the duty of care the same, or you know, how does that work then?
I think for the small business, it's about being pragmatic, and small business owners are very much focused on that. Find, get, keep, develop customers. They're just only doing multitasks. I think the key thing for them is to try and devalue the data that's passing through their company. There are some very simple technologies that you can use that will keep it in it's still thousands, right? But it's not tens of thousands. So simple technologies to devalue the data in the organization so that the data they're protecting is of less value to the outside world. Tokenization is a very good way, web redirection. So instead of having the cash on the front desk, so to speak, with the data value sitting very close to where it can be grabbed, go and stick it in the bank. So use the payment service providers, use the acquiring bank infrastructure that's geared up to small, medium-sized businesses, and make sure the data's managed, particularly payment card data, is managed back in their safe, where at least you've got some comeback if their vulnerabilities are exposed.
So I just take issue a little bit with the naming and shaming, because every single company and organisation in the country would have been attacked at some stage. So I think public confidence is really important. But what I wanted to say was I went to a talk recently by Chris Donnelly from the Military Academy, and he talked about us being in a state of ambiguous warfare. He said the only 2 countries in the world who have a cyber strategic plan are China and Israel. So if we are at war, which is what he says we are, would people behave differently? Would there be joined up thinking?
Can I comment on that? My son's a historian at Yale, and I've been reading a book, reading about his boss, a guy called Paul Kennedy, who wrote a very interesting book about problem solving as a strategic asset for the Allies in World War II. And the strategy that Kennedy diagnoses is one where the middle level of decision making within these vast organisations is told what the issue is, like how do we get convoys safely across the Atlantic without them being sunk by U-boats, but then are given a license to be very innovative in finding solutions, and you'll find that all kinds of solutions help win the Battle of Atlantic. I've been very struck by this book, and I find it very persuasive. And I'm wondering whether that general approach, in the sense of articulating clearly what strategic goals are and what threats are, I think we've probably got some way to go before we've got that clear articulation, but enabling high levels of creativity at the middle level within organisations. I wonder if that approach has a role to play here.
I'd like to add something to this. I haven't read this book by Kennedy, but I know something about what happened in the Second World War.
Right.
I'm completely blind to what you say. It wasn't just that middle-level people were given a good understanding of what the problem was. They were given ownership to a very great extent of the solution. They were told, go and find us a solution. Now, to relate this back to your question, I wouldn't say, by the way, that China and Israel are the only two countries. I think that at a strategic level, Iran has a strategy for cyber warfare. The United States talks about it a great deal. I think that they're confused because they've got an over-complex system. I've actually heard the former head of the NSA talk about this. The way he described it, he said pretty much in these words, it looks as if this is something that was written about in The Onion. He's a very funny guy, but that's another story. Britain doesn't have a strategy. Other countries have a strategy in purely defensive terms. Russia definitely has a strategy. Because I'm quite closely involved in what happens in Israel, I can comment a bit. On the defensive side, certainly, there is definitely a defensive strategy, which is to basically rely on all of the human resources that are available in the country, from school kids up to the Prime Minister's office, to the intelligence services. There's a very high level, to come back to what Ian was saying, of joined upness. I sit on it's not an official committee, it's almost a self-appointed group in Israel of the top cybersecurity experts. It's actually convened by a think tank at Tel Aviv University, which is headed by the former head of Defense R&D. And so we have people from the startup world and big cybersecurity companies and the intelligence services and the government and the army and academia, all sitting around a big table and talking about the subjects that matter. Not at a high level of security, it's all basically unclassified stuff, but nevertheless it's a very important talking shop for what do we need to do, what are the problems, who's doing what, where do we need help on certain things. And everyone is taking ownership, in a sense, in a national problem. Now, that's something that doesn't happen here. It should. It doesn't happen in the United States, where you've got an enormously bureaucratic system. In Russia, I don't know where the decision-making is taking place. It's probably mainly in the Kremlin and the intelligence services. In China, which is a highly bureaucratic and top-down system, you can pretty well guarantee that there isn't any sense of ownership spread through the system of cyber strategy or cyber security. On the contrary, you've got 100,000 people in the People's Army who are doing cyber stuff, mainly offensive, which is more people than the whole China now. But they're doing what they're told to do. The only exception to that is that when they knock off at 5 o'clock or whatever, they go home and they have the freedom to use their skills to carry out cyber crime attacks on whoever they choose. And that's a sort of given in China, rather like there's a similar given in Russia. You know, one can talk about this for a long time. It's a very complicated issue politically.
I wanted to ask you if you think that something has changed this year, because eBay lost all their data in April, everybody seemed to shrug their shoulders, they got away with it. Carphone lost their data in the summer, kind of got away with it again. And we get to talk, and the tone changes. Do you feel that they were just clumsy with the way they handled their PR, or do you think something has changed so that people from now on won't accept what's gone before?
I think they were exceptionally bad in their response. They didn't have a worked out response and tried to take the cheap option. And as we all know in disaster scenarios, you've really got to make big actions very, very quickly and not say how much does that cost. It's what should we do? What is the right thing for the company to do? And they didn't get out of the tracks quick enough. And secondly, it's the build-up. It's become cumulative. I think one is unlucky, but now it's happening every week, and it's getting closer and closer and closer to us all as individuals.
Do you feel that now that maybe the genie is out of the bottle, that every subsequent breach is going to attract this sort of quite aggressive media attention now?
It will become another PPI.
I think it's a third breach of TalkTalk as well.
Yeah, no, I know how we ended up where we ended up. I'm just wondering if going forward, the rules have now changed for everybody.
I completely agree with you. The rules have changed.
Okay.
And we might have reached an inflection point. And if I could make a plea to everybody in this room, whenever they come across the government or people in authority, say, please put together a strategy on this.
You talked about sheep earlier on and people following suit. So who should be the leader in this? Who should be the ones that step up and say, we need to invest, and we've found particular technology, maybe from FinTech, maybe it's just down the road, and invest in new ideas and actually implement them instead of talking about them. Who do you think should lead the industry and lead other businesses in their approach to security?
If we're talking about the financial industry, which is very much proactive in the area of cybersecurity, first of all, it should be the people in the industry. It should be the banks and the insurers and the so on and so forth, who actually do a little bit of internal work, including brainstorming on what is it we need to do in order to make ourselves more secure, or whatever. Let us put out a call for proposals, for example. There needs to be more proactive work by the financial industry in saying, this is what we need. By the way, this is true in all areas of FinTech. It's not only around security. We need better people in algorithms. We need better people or better solutions in marketing analysis, or whatever it might be, in order to be able to provide better return on investment to their shareholders, because after all, that is the bottom line. It's not only service to the public. After all, they're getting shareholder money in order to do this work. So there was a certain abdication of responsibility, in my opinion, in the financial industry after a long period when banks were saying, we're going to put a lot of money into new tech, and we have a technology, whatever, initiative department somewhere under the CIO or the CTO. All of that disappeared when the banks started to lose money. They've got to do it again, more actively. Yes, there are banks that have venture funds. That's great. They need to also think in terms of what do they need themselves. You can't stop the phenomenon of sheep in the high-tech industry in general, especially when it's funded by VCs, because the VCs also act like sheep. I've been around this world for quite a few years. I know a lot of VCs personally. They're all playing catch-up with each other. There was a period when everyone was doing social media and networks and so on and so forth, and enormous amounts of money were being poured into the next LinkedIn clone, which usually lost about 50 million quid and then fell apart. It's always going to happen, but I think that over time, certainly the VCs are going to become a little bit more sophisticated and mature, especially the ones that are run by the former startup people themselves. You know, there are too many ex-investment bankers and accountants and so on and so forth populating the VC world. They don't quite understand what venture capital is, I'm sorry to say.
Can I comment as well? I mean, I think you're gesturing at an issue which has come up a few times in the presentations, which is absolutely critical, which is governance. And what we have to have is better or relevant governance within firms of all sorts. And there are forces sort of within the standards world that are insisting that strategic risk management becomes a necessary part of running any business. Changes it within global quality standards, for example, which started happening this year. We need those things to happen. Standards can help. They're sometimes, if they're just treated as tick boxes, then they do limited good. But we need decent governance at that level, and we need to think about this set of risks within the total portfolio of risks that are managed by firms, because at the end of the day, money's got to go into it. Money's got to go into countermeasures in order to support all the innovation companies that are coming along. But that money has got to be allocated sensibly relative to other sorts of risks.
And just one more to add. I think the other side of that investment has got to be using data security as a competitive differentiator. I think that's where the revenue side, to attract customers into a safe environment. And sure, we're going to see, aren't we, where TalkTalk will end up in terms of customer acquisition and so forth in the future, what that true cost is over the next 12 months. But I think for those firms, particularly at a sort of mid-size level, the bigger brands, if they can make sure their customers are happy and feeling secure, then I think there is some competitive advantage down the line.
Can I ask a question of other members of the panel about this? Because I think there's a very important point, John, that comes out of what you just said. Is it possible for companies to make security part of their brand promise? What do you think?
I think it must be, because a brand always has trust as an element of it, and either that trust is well-founded and proved to be well-founded, or it isn't. So,
yeah,
they have to underpin that trust.
But it's implicit at the moment. I'm wondering whether it's possible for banks or cell phone companies or whatever to make security part of their explicit brand promise.
I think promise is probably quite a strong word, but I think it should be part of the brand, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think the only other thing I'd add from our perspective, from the payments industry, is we'd love a consistent application of the rules by everybody that's involved. One of the problems you get is these things are open to interpretation, but if you get one side of the equation being tough and the other side decides not to be tough, we as advisors sitting in the middle, it's frustrating to say the least.
Not PCI DSS.
We might be talking about that. Yeah. Exactly. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to bring the Q&A session to a halt at that point. It goes without saying, I think, that we convey our thanks to the panel who have soldiered through, but also thank you to all of you for turning up this evening and joining in. So, thanks to everybody. We're not finishing proceedings now. There's still an opportunity to network and chat. So, but that's the formal end of the evening. So thank you very much to the panel and to you.